So for our next trick, we are going to be kerfing the bottom panel of each stack. That's all going to make sense as it starts to come together. In fact, some of you bright sparks may have already worked out where and why that's going to happen. A few people have asked me, how do you calculate a curve? And honestly, I've never found it terribly difficult. It really is a function of the width of the blade and the difference in length between the inside and the outside of the curve. Now, the difference in length of the inside arc versus the outside arc is easy for me to find because I've designed it on CAD. It's not a 90-degree angle, it's actually a little bit more than that, but thanks to the magic of CAD, I have been able to click on the arc segments that are on the design. The inner, rounded up, is 163 millimeters long. The outer is 184, which makes the inner arc 21 millimeters shorter than the outer. I've done a test cut here with my saw blade, and I've got a fairly small 8-inch circular saw here, and that measures as a 2 millimeter wide cut. Of course, 21 millimeters divided by 2 millimeter cuts equals 10.5 cuts. That doesn't work, but in this case you always round up. So 11 cuts should give us a kerf where each cut nearly completely closes in order to make that kerf, which is what we want. That'll make the strongest kerf with the least amount of work. So that's fantastic. We need to make 11 cuts, but how much distance is going to be between each cut? So our outer distance is 184 millimeters, and there's going to be 11 cuts, which means that we need to measure 10 distances between each cut. There's one at either end. That's pretty easy, and it gives us 18.4 millimeters between each cut. So the next step I've got to take is to test it. It's all good and well to calculate this on paper, but it's much more useful to test it on a piece of MDF. And I'm going to use this one in particular, mainly because it makes it a lot easier to set cut depth, and it makes it a lot easier to verify what's going on before you commit to cutting the main pieces. So I'm going to do that now and see how it goes. Hey Adam, what did the saw blade say to the kerf? Get bent. So I was trying to jig this up and do some test cuts with the blade that was on the saw last night. And it's a pretty thin blade, and I measured the saw cut width because that's important for the kerfing. It was like 5 mil. How does a saw blade this thick, cut a 5 mil cut?
By going like that?
Yeah, because it's got some substantially bent teeth. So that'll do it. That'll do it. Oh, check it out. I have some kerfing. Look at that. So I've fine-tuned the depth, and I've done a test run of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cuts at just over 18 millimeters spacing. And what that's resulted in is that bends. Now there's a fair bit of force required in that. It's a firm handshake. And that is because I haven't cut further through than I need to. That really is a trial and error process. And you can see it's resulted in a nice stepped curve. That's going to require minimal smoothing. None of it's broken through. None of it is inconsistent in its depth. So let's see how it fits on our curve here. I don't necessarily have the placement correct here. It will be on the final version, but as you can see, that's meeting up nicely. And you can see that the backside of all the cuts have just about closed up, and that's because, like I say, we can't do 0.4 of a cut. That's 11 cuts. So that works really well. Obviously, it's still quite springy. It wants to return to straight. And that's something I'm looking to mitigate. I want it to hold its shape, and so we're going to put fiberglass woven mat over the back of this once we've done the final kerfs. So our test piece has proven that our kerf is going to work well. So it's time to commit to our pieces. So it's time to join the two main parts of the subwoofer enclosure together. So you can see me laying down some CA glue here, and that is to set the angled part that our kerf is going to fit into onto the main fascia of the box. So just laying that down, clamping it up nicely so that that sets in place. A little bit of body working to do on that joint afterwards, but it's certainly lined up pretty nicely. So with that all glued up, it's time to trim the bottom panels to length. I left them full length because I wanted to lay them onto the box here, secure them in place, and then mark exactly where I need to cut them so that they are exactly the right length. That's stupid good. Didn't even have to nip it up. Just, it's there. These base panels, which have been kerfed, are ready to attach for the first time for the last time, as Adam would say. We've done a rabbet here, which is not the full width of where the wall sits of the box. It's a little bit narrower than that, and it's probably just less than 1 millimeter deep. Now that's deliberate. That is to allow a little bit of expansion space for the adhesive that we use to join this to the bottom of the box eventually. It gives us a better chance of it not oozing out into the box cavity itself with any luck. So that'll come into play once you see what sort of adhesive we're using. The top edge has been trimmed. All the pencil markings that we don't need anymore have been taken off, just to neaten it up a little bit less work to do down the track. And it's ready to screw into place so that we can fiberglass that kerf and attach the baffle. So our freshly trimmed panel going into place, and it's time now to permanently join the baffle pieces onto there as well. And now laying up the fiberglass sheet. So we're using woven strand mat here, and really the intention here is to just lay some woven mat over the section that is curved, and it's really a way to lock in that shape so that the MDF is set in that shape. It doesn't want to spring back to flat again, and we've got some nice structural integrity on both sides of the kerf there. So just masking up now, laying down a little bit of spray adhesive and then sticking our mat on top. Really that's just to make sure that it stays in place while we apply the resin. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That now just sits perfectly. So it all holds its shape, absolutely stunning. I'm so excited about that. And there is only one thing left to do on this episode, and that is to test fit these enclosures in the car. Okay, check this out. It all fits. I shouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, I'm really excited. It's one thing to have it all designed on computer, and it's one thing to measure how you think it's all going to fit and try and translate that into CAD software. It's another thing entirely for it to actually fit and actually work how you want it to. And I'm really glad that there weren't any serious roadblocks to making that happen. There was certainly a lot of tweaking, but nothing fatal, that I really had to go back to the drawing board on. So I'm really glad I put the time I did into the designing and the checking and the double checking and the triple checking before I sent all the designs off, because they've worked. I'm so excited, and to see this all come together, to see how the space is being filled up and what's going to be left to fabricate by hand. It's pretty encouraging, because there's not much space left. And I mean that in a good way. It's going to be easier to fabricate the fill panels that are going to close this whole install in, because there's not much to do. So that's really exciting. I've got to keep at it though, because really, this is the middle of the process. It feels like it's been a long time already, but there's a fair bit more to go yet, because these things are just sitting there. That's no good. We need to make sure that they're going to be fastened in properly in a way that we can get to them, service them, remove them whenever we need to. We need to make sure there's room for everything else to be presented and wired up and on show neatly. And we need to make sure that all the gaps are filled. So there's trim panels and stuff where we need them to be. So next, I'm going to do a whole lot of measuring and marking so that we've got some reference points to go on. And I'm going to start making some fill panels and things. So it's some more stuff to do. So there's one thing we're going to need to fill. I originally thought that we were going to be able to send the cables up where that black and blue cable are going now, but they get pinched by the subwoofer box, which actually all makes sense once you have a look at it. But yeah, we're going to need to fill in that gap, and I've got the option of either doing something flat over the top of all of this or matching the profile of this armrest. So I'll have a look into that. I'll decide how I want to do it, because I was kind of thinking of incorporating some black Alcantara here, some black macro suede here. So we'll see what happens. Over here, we've got the center console ending here, and then we've got the run towards the back, and you can see my sneaky little processor placement there already. So between here and in here, there are plenty of mounting bosses for the seat belts, and they're all hidden. They are not a single one of them is accessible, and I suppose at the end of the day that's all right, but I'm going to need to come up with something alternative, and the idea is going to probably be a saddle which sits here and allows both boxes to bolt onto it there, so that should be all right. Over here, well, a little bit trickier again, but I'm sure we can come up with something. I need to be mindful of the fuel tank and the tail shaft here as well, of course, if I'm mounting anything, and depending on how I mount it as well. So plenty to think about there. And likewise, I need to do that on the other side, obviously. And then out the back, we'll look into that as well. Because I want to have the power distribution hardware and the processor on show. And we've got to do all that neatly, but we've also got to, well, fill in the blanks. And I want to show off the depth of this install as much as I can. I want to get as much space out of this boot as possible. I've got this panel here from a previous install, and I've just tucked that in to see how that's going to look and, you know, get some ideas and things together. I'm not anywhere with it yet, but you've got to start somewhere, don't you? So I'm going to keep looking into it.